Hi class. In this module, we are talking about how to plan to teach, and that includes course level planning, program level planning, and then college-wide planning. I want to begin with a very interesting quote, at least I find it interesting. And this is in chapter 5 of Latuka and Stark. They say, college instructors spend relatively little time in systematic planning activities prior to teaching an existing course. An early study showed that instructors preparing to teach an existing course spent only about 2 hours prior to the beginning of the course. Now, in your discussion this week, you're going to discuss how it's different, or if you perceive any difference, between designing a new course and teaching an existing course. But I did find this striking and yet not unusual. So we're going to talk first about Fink and some guiding questions, and then I'll return to Latuka and Stark here. So this is at the end of chapter 4 in your Fink reading, but I think this is actually a great place to start, to think about the kinds of questions you want to ask yourself, especially related to the discussion. So in the initial phase, this is specifically talking about course planning. You want to know where you are now. There was some discussion in chapter 3 of Fink about sizing the situational factors. A lot of that's related to who your learners are, what institution you're at, etc. Where do you want to go? So setting the learning goals, or identifying what learning goals have already been set for the course. What would demonstrate success for the students? How are you going to get there? Selecting your learning activities, and then using resources, who and what can help. So that's the initial phase and building those primary components of your course. Then you get into an intermediate phase. And so once you have all of those components, it's still not enough. Even once you've identified those components, you need to understand the proper sequence, for example. This is saying, what is the major topic in the course? What are the themes? You'll see in my course, I've arranged these into modules, and that's a way for me to think about how the themes progress. What the students need to do is an important aspect as well, in not only identifying the learning activities, but then also what the goals of each of those learning activities might be. And then dealing with sequence and structure. There's a great graphic at the end of the Fink chapter as well. It's called the castle sequence, and so you might want to take a look at that to see how structuring inside class, quote unquote, and outside class activities can be structured. And now all of this can be applied to the online environment as well, but you do have to think a bit differently about that. And finally, these are 4 more important considerations before you launch a course, whether it's online or in person. Developing your grading system. So a lot of instructors put something in the syllabus and then end up developing the grading system as it goes along. That's not advisable. So you want to know how you're going to grade. You want to know or anticipate what things could go wrong. What if a discussion falls flat, right? How are you going to respond to that? What if an assignment you had planned doesn't quite work out as you thought it was going to? What if there's confusion about certain things? And how will students know what you're going to do? That includes not only the syllabus, but also your course introduction and orientation. And then you also want to include an evaluation phase, of course. So this is a really great resource in Fink's chapter 4 for creating a course and the things you need to be thinking about before you launch a course. I also just want to highlight some of the key points from Latuka and Stark. And the 3 levels again are course, program, and college-wide. For course planning, it tends to be that there are individual faculty members working relatively informally on their course plan. So I know I'm teaching Psychology 105 in the fall term. I am going to approach that rather informally by not necessarily having a plan, but thinking first and then writing a syllabus maybe. It tends to be informal in that way, not planned out. And the role varies based on institution type. So I'll give you one example is Wilmington University. They have course templates, and if you teach for them, you are required to use that course template. So a lot of the planning is taken out of your responsibility and placed on the institution. Program planning tends to be more collaborative because you have multiple scholars working on one overall program, and it's typically encouraged or influenced by external factors. So our new program in robotics at Widener is a great example. We're responding to market trends, to student demands for that type of information, and we had to assemble a group of people in a more systematic way, and you would want to consider that when you're putting the curriculum together. College-wide planning is dependent on the institution type as well, but typically, again, that's more systematic and takes longer typically than program planning. So it's typically committee-based. It could be happening through faculty governance. In fact, it typically does. And there is a lot of discussion at the levels of individual faculty, department chairs, program, faculty, and finally the provost level. So now this discussion is going to only focus on the course planning part. And I want you to use both Fink and Latuca and Stark if possible in your responses. If you were planning to teach a new course, which of the steps would you prioritize? I would choose just 2 or 3. What do you think might be most important? If you were planning to teach an existing course, what steps would you take? Is that different? Is it the same? And why? And then finally, this can be in a separate post or you can include it in your initial post. What steps are often skipped or skimmed over? I mentioned a couple here, but what are some of the roadblocks to planning? How can we overcome them? Which step do you think is most important? What should we certainly not skip, right? So these are just some ideas to get you going, and I want you to think specifically about that course level, and I'm here for any questions. Thanks.